Okay, I'd like to call the May 2020 Poquoson School Board meeting to order. Do we have any additions or modifications to the agenda?
We do not this evening.
Any public comment?
No, sir, we do not.
Okay, so next item is consent agenda. Ms. Sheila, would you like to walk us through the consent agenda, please?
Sure. On the consent agenda is the approval for personnel action, the authorization to accept donations and gifts to PCPS, the approval of the minutes of April's regular meeting, the approval of minutes of the closed sessions held on April 18th and April 21st, the approval of minutes of special meeting held on May 5th, the authorization for the superintendent to execute a contract with Service Solutions Corporation to provide custodial janitorial services to the Poquoson City Public Schools, and the authorization to dispose of surplus property.
Thank you, ma'am. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Ms. Reimers?
Mr. Holcomb?
Aye.
Ms. Hessel?
Aye.
Mr. Jordan?
Aye.
Mr. Freeman?
Aye.
Mr. Ingram?
Aye.
Vice Chair Sheeler?
Aye.
Chairman Carter?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. Other matters for consideration. Item A, consideration of approval of moving first reading of General Assembly changes to policy manual to second reading. Dr. Parrish.
Yes, every year at this time, we bring to you a series of policies that need to be updated based on the work of the General Assembly. So as you may remember, our school board attorney works with us on this to make sure that our policy language is correct. So you received a rather thick packet that has all of those policies that need to be updated with the marks contained in the packet. So those are all, again, ones that are a result of the work done by the General Assembly. So those changes range from a variety of things. Some are connected to changes to how we handle student suspensions, to health issues with students. So anyways, you've got that packet. I recommend now that you move it to second reading, so then you'll be able to approve them at your June meeting, and they'll be in place for July 1.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Any questions, comments there? Ms. Reimers?
Mr. Holcomb?
Aye.
Ms. Hessel?
Aye.
Mr. Jordan?
Aye.
Mr. Freeman?
Aye.
Mr. Ingram?
Aye.
Vice Chair Sheeler?
Aye.
Chairman Carter?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. Next item, consideration of approval of moving first reading policy changes to second reading. Dr. Parrish.
Yes, this is separate from your other packet because these changes to policy, we actually were going to bring back to you in March, and then we were unable to have that meeting with you, and I was holding off until perhaps we were able to have open meetings, but since that is not anywhere on a horizon, I've brought them back in for you to approve today for second reading so that you can do the final approval again in June, so they'll be in place for July. So in this instance, I and others went through different policies to make sure that we are aligned with our practice and with our regulations. So you've got a few changes in here that I ask that you move this evening into second reading.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve? So moved. And a second?
Second.
Questions, comments there? Ms. Reimer?
Mr. Holcomb?
Aye.
Ms. Hessel?
Aye.
Mr. Jordan?
Aye.
Mr. Freeman?
Aye.
Mr. Ingram?
Aye.
Vice Chair Sheeler?
Aye.
Chairman Carter?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. Next item, consideration of approval of the PCPS Gifted Education Plan 2020 through 2021 through 2024, 2025. Dr. Parrish.
Yes, so every 5 years you do update, or we update the gifted plan, and then it needs to be approved by the school board. Please know that this was worked on prior to the national health crisis, so the GIAC committee, which is the Gifted Advisory Committee, did work with staff on this, and that does include parents. So what you have here is an executive summary of that gifted education plan that we also then submit to VDOE. So I recommend approval of that plan this evening.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve?
So move.
And a second?
Second.
Any questions, comments there? Reimers?
Mr. Holcomb?
Aye.
Ms. Hessel? Aye. Mr. Jordan?
Aye.
Mr. Freeman?
Aye.
Mr. Ingram?
Aye.
Vice Chair Sheeler?
Aye.
Chairman Carter?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Next item, consideration of approval of the PCPS Educational Technology Plan Addendum. Dr. Parrish.
Yes, VDOE timeframe for this is every 5 years, but we actually, as a division, update the technology plan every 2 years, just because of the changing nature of technology. So again, this plan was developed prior to the virus hitting us, so we had participation from other stakeholders in the development of this update. I will tell you that this update to our plan was created prior to us moving into a one-to-one computing model like we have now online. So I anticipate next year there'll be another update because you'll see changes in how we're handling computers with students now that we have enough for every student in the school division. So with that said, I recommend approval of the Educational Technology Plan as presented to you this evening.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve the technology plan?
So move.
Second? Any questions, comments there? Ms. Reimers?
Mr. Holcomb?
Aye.
Ms. Hessel?
Aye.
Mr. Jordan?
Aye.
Mr. Freeman?
Aye.
Mr. Ingram?
Aye.
Vice Chair Sheeler?
Aye.
Chairman Carter?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Next item, consideration of approval of the 2020-2021 Perkins Grant. Dr. Parrish.
Yes, so this is a federal grant that we apply for each year that supports our CTE programs. I do want to highlight in here that our grant funding is low for this, where our application is for just over $17,000. But I do recommend approval of the Perkins Grant as presented to you this evening.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve?
So move.
And a second?
Second.
Any questions, comments there? How short is it compared to what we typically get?
Oh, it's a normal funding amount for us, but I just wanted the community to know, it's not like other school divisions have much larger Perkins grants.
okay,
I just
gotcha.
wanted everyone to
Okay.
understand it's not a windfall of money for us.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Reimers?
Mr. Holcomb?
Aye.
Ms. Hessel? Mr. Jordan?
Aye.
Mr. Freeman?
Aye.
Mr. Ingram?
Aye.
Vice Chair Sheeler?
Aye.
Chairman Carter?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Next item, consideration of approval of the adoption of geography and astronomy textbooks.
Yes, so this is a course that we'll be offering in the school division next year, and so we need you to approve the adoption of these textbooks. Again, we did have these out for review by the community prior to us having to close schools as a result of the pandemic, but we're bringing it forward to you for approval this evening.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve the adoption?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Questions, comments there? Wish they had those courses when I was in high school. It sounds exciting, yeah. Ms. Reimer?
Mr. Holcomb?
Aye.
Ms. Hessel?
Aye.
Mr. Jordan?
Aye.
Mr. Freeman?
Aye.
Mr. Ingram?
Aye.
Vice Chair Sheeler?
Aye.
Chairman Carter?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Next item, consideration of approval of the amended fiscal year 21 budget.
Yes, so if you had told me 3 months ago that I'd be standing in front of you presenting another superintendent's proposed budget, I would have told you I really don't think that will happen. But here I am, presenting a new budget to you for fiscal year 21. And obviously the reason for this is because the national health crisis has also now created a national economic crisis. So as you're aware, in April, the governor issued his own new amended fiscal year 21 budget, and then the General Assembly came to Richmond, and they approved a final version of a new budget for fiscal year 21, which has had an impact on our school division for next year. So what I'm presenting to you now is that new budget that I'll be asking you to approve this evening. So just as a reminder, what we always do or have some budget priorities, this is what we used obviously when we went into budget planning way back in December, and for that budget that we produced in March, but to provide a compensation increase for all employees and to maintain and enhance all of our instructional programs. Unfortunately, what you're going to see is we're no longer able to meet both of our budget priorities, and I'll explain that as we move through. You have seen this information before, and I know community members have too, but it's just really important right now that everyone understand from where we've come since the Great Recession, which really the first year of budget development once the recession hit was fiscal year 10. And I say this is important because, one, what I'm about to present is, again, a reduced budget, but I also am concerned that, we are moving into a national recession, which means I think budget planning for the next several years will be very challenging, and we've never overcome what we really had to do during the recession. So this is, again, a walkthrough of that. So remember that in fiscal year 10, again, first year the budget was impacted by the recession, our school division went into it as the lowest reported per pupil cost in the state of Virginia. That meant we were already incredibly lean in our budget. So we didn't, even when the recession hit, have a real ability to cut out of a budget that was just full of things that would be easy to make budget reductions from. Also, during the time period since fiscal year 10, we made approximately $5 million worth of programmatic and personnel reductions. We had to do that because state funding was reduced as a result of the recession. We also saw additional reductions in state funding because of decreases in enrollment, and also the VRS rate increases were pretty large after we got through the first couple years of the recession, because the General Assembly used the VRS rates to try and get themselves through the recession by dropping them, and then they had to be built back up, which was an added increase to the school division. So just a reminder that when VRS rates are increased, we see a little more money coming from the state because they're having to pay more. It comes in our budget, it goes out. Okay, so sometimes it's hard to look at our budget because like, oh, look, there's more money in it. It's money coming in and flowing out, and then in addition to that, we as a school division have to pay additional money for that rate increase. So we also experienced during that time period typical cost increases. Even though we were in a recession, it didn't mean that our utility bills weren't higher, that health insurance wasn't more expensive. All of that was very true too. And I say to you, as you move into what I think is a new recession, that issue is going to exist as well. From fiscal year 10 through fiscal year 13, we eliminated 54 and a half positions. To put perspective on that, we currently have 282 positions now. So that gives you a sense of how deep those cuts were to get to the 54 and a half positions. We were losing enrollment during that time, but we ended up cutting 11 more teaching positions than we needed to cut for enrollment. So we overcompensated. And we haven't gotten those positions back in just because financially we haven't been able to afford to do that. We have netted 3 positions in since fiscal year 14. But remember, 54 and a half positions were reduced in the years prior to that, starting in fiscal year 10. We did in 2 years eliminate 2 instructional programs as a result of needing to find additional revenue reductions in our budget. The good thing that I want to remind folks is that the city of Poquoson during this time period did provide us with approximately $1.8 million in additional funding. That money helped to save positions. If we had not received that money from the city during this time period, that 54 and a half would be a larger number. It also enabled us in some of those years to provide some form of compensation to our employees, however small that unfortunately was during some of those years. So that's the history of where we've come. And that's a good thing to remember as you move now into what, forecasters are telling us will be likely another recession. I want to talk about enrollment because I'm also changing this projection right now. So what you see here is our actual average daily membership for the last 4 years to include this school year. Remember that we're paid by the state based on average daily membership, which is essentially our attendance rate. So we talk about enrollment, but then we have to subtract the number of students that would make up sort of that average daily membership. So what you see here is last year and this year, we actually had exactly the same average daily membership, which is pretty remarkable. So as I said earlier this fall, we didn't hit our projection in terms of the increased enrollment that we anticipated having. We actually ended up being at the same that we were last year. So when I brought the budget to you in March, what I projected for you is that we'd see an increase of 14 students moving into next school year. And I did that based on the research and information we received from the Weldon Cooper Center. Actually, they used their more conservative number because their less conservative number had us having a greater increase in enrollment, but a little nervous about that when we had that level increase from last year to this year. And we also did get our kindergarten registration in early, so that gives us a sense of where we are. What I'm bringing you tonight, though, holds our enrollment flat and our ADM flat, because there's two reasons for this. One, with the virus, with the experience that we've had with this pandemic, there's a little concern that some parents, even if we go back into school as normal next year, that parents may choose not to enroll their students and keep them home because they're concerned about their students' health. Although obviously the school division would take every step necessary to protect our students' health. The other issue that could exist next year too is if the virus is still in Virginia and hits our community, you may see a higher rate of absenteeism. So your average daily membership may drop, not because your enrollment's lower, but because you have students out longer for excused absences due to health issues related to this. So for that reason, I'm recommending that we're even more conservative with our enrollment projections, hence our ADM projection, and just leave that as flat moving into next year. So that does cause, as you'll see in a moment, an additional reduction in state funding. So just a summary of your budget that that you approved and that we sent over to City Council. In that, you had a compensation increase for all employees. You also had an increase in pay for all substitutes tied to the minimum wage increase. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. We also had provided support for increased instructional costs. We wanted to add another grade level to attend the Aviation Academy that we partner with Newport News. We also had to support some changes in our program of studies, an additional teacher at the preschool level, as well as a sign language interpreter. We also had some support for increased operational costs. Those are those annual contracting costs that we see, as well as supporting some additional technology costs. We did see the increase in VRS rates. Those were increased again this year by the state, by the General Assembly, so we needed to provide funding for that. We had really good news this year, which is going to be incredibly important for you next year, and that we went out to bid for health insurance and selected Optima. We saw an actual decrease in our health insurance rates, which provided us savings, which you don't often have the words health insurance and savings in the same sentence. But I think even better news than that is we locked that rate in for next year. So as you move into likely what will be a recession next year, at least you will not have to contend with an increase in health insurance rates next year. So the fact that we were able to do that is, I think, really important. And also, we saw some personnel savings in the March budget. As we have people leave, new people come, we see a difference in the cost of their salaries and benefits, and we captured that for the budget. Now for the news that isn't quite as good as the budget that you approved in March. So what you see here are the change in revenue since the March budget. And this is primarily connected to the work done in Richmond in April and is a result of the economic crisis that our country and state is now experiencing. So you see this reduction in SOQ funding of over almost $123,000. That is because of the reduction of the ADM estimate by 14 students. So that gives you a good sense of what it means when enrollment drops or enrollment increases. So that's why you're seeing that reduction in revenue. Then you see the reduction of the compensation supplement. Supplement is the term that the state uses for their compensation, but we're talking there is about the funding for compensation. So the state provides compensation, or did for our March budget, of over $169,000. Because the state is eliminating all of their compensation support for fiscal year 21, I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, that is now a loss of $169,000. Also, we saw a reduction in incentive and categorical funding of just over $14,000, an example of one of the categories, at-risk students. So these are specific categories in the state budget that flow into school divisions. The next one is a really important one, reduction of sales tax projection by 10%. So our budget is about $24 million, and we get about $2.2 million in sales tax revenue into our budget, state revenue into our budget. So the sales tax revenue is an important component of our budget. Well, as you well know, because of this economic crisis, we're seeing not as much purchasing being done by citizens of our country, citizens of our state, and that's causing a reduction in sales tax revenue. The budget that was presented, that came out of Richmond after we had the pandemic in April, actually still held our sales tax revenue at the same place that it was when the governor's budget was put out in December. Because what the state is not doing right now is estimating what that sales tax revenue loss is going to look like. And I understand that. But we need to be proactive and look to see what might that loss be, so we don't get caught at some point during the next school year and not have the funding to offset a loss. So what I did is I went out and did quite a bit of research, looking to see what happened to sales tax revenue in the last recession in Virginia, and also looked at some other economic sources to see in general what happens to sales tax revenue when you see downturns in the economy. I also, through VAST, reached out to Fiscal Analytics, which is a consulting company. A gentleman in that company does a lot of work with superintendents as well as local governments in talking about analyzing state budgets, national budgets. And so based on the research I did and the recommendation from him at Fiscal Analytics, I'm putting in here an estimate that we'll see a loss of sales tax revenue at a 10% rate, okay? That costs us almost $250,000. Now, there are school divisions that are projecting that to be a greater loss in sales tax revenue. There are others that are where we are. There may be others that are doing less. But just know this was well thought out, but I cannot guarantee you that it's not going to be a different number because it's so unknown right now. And right now, you know, the state is 2 months in the rears for sales tax numbers. So know that we don't even know yet what sales tax revenue look like in April or this month, which are the months that probably you're going to see the bigger hits because people have been under the stay-at-home order. I will say that online shopping and the fact that we now see that come in as part of the sales tax revenue is helpful to all of us in the state, but still, you know what's gone on out in the world in stores and restaurants. You're just not seeing as much of that. So that's a big number there that we've had to account for in this budget development. So you see the total state funding reductions at over $555,000 that we now need to take out of this budget, which I'm going to walk you through how we do that. In addition, there's a slight reduction in what we call local revenue because of a change in compensation. Aramark actually reduces what they pay for us slightly for an employee that is an employee of ours. So the total comes down to a loss of $556,000. Now what you see here, and you see the note at the bottom, I have not accounted for lottery funding in here because that is another big unknown. So it might be that we see a decrease in lottery funding coming to you as well. That also comes out in the rears, okay? Now what we did find out this morning is that we did see a decrease, a fairly large decrease in the lottery funding in March, but then the decrease was smaller in April. I think it went from like 27% to 13%. So they're thinking maybe that people are now out because we're in phase one, so the lottery might pick back up. So in terms of this year's budget, we're seeing an impact in it, but we're able to handle that. But it might be by the time we're getting into your next year's budget, lottery is maintaining at a fairly level. Do know in this budget I'm presenting tonight, while you don't see lottery specified in here, we do have a budget that if that starts to drop, you'll be okay. Now, if everything starts to drop, you know, then it might be a little different story here, but we can handle that within this budget. So let me just briefly talk about the compensation increase, or in this case, what's now going to be a decrease. So remember that originally the General Assembly funded a 2% compensation increase for SOQ funded positions. So once again, I know you guys think I'm a broken record, but who knows, somebody new might be watching us on TV. So SOQ funded positions, that is only 69% of our positions, because again, we have teaching positions beyond the minimum that are required because that's what everyone needs to do for our students. And also then when they're paying compensation, it's only 67% of that 69%. So a lot of that compensation still falls on us and ultimately our locality, our city, to pay for that. So they pulled out that 2% compensation out of the state budget when they met and approved a new budget in April. So what that means is because we're not getting the state funding for the compensation, and because we have other areas that we now need to cover a loss of, like sales tax revenue, we are not able to give any kind of compensation to our employees. So the 2% compensation is gone from the budget right now, and I know You as a board, it's always been incredibly important to you to provide additional compensation. For me personally, I hate doing what we're doing, but this new economic reality that we're in has led to this. The next one is also problematic, and I'm also going to talk about this a little bit later. Our teachers are on a step scale. Those of you that have been on the board for a while may remember that we had a compensation study done. We were the only school division in the area that didn't have a true step plan. We implemented one. We did put spots on that compensation plan where you might go for a year and not get a step increase, but if we gave you a raise, then you got the raise. We did that to make the step plan a little more affordable in case we got to times like this, but right now, we don't have the funding even to cover that step increase because of these reductions. This year, if we were to fully fund a step increase for all our teachers, it would cost us $109,000. So we just are unable to do that. That means if a teacher's on step 2 this year, unless things change, when that teacher comes back next year, they'll still be on step 2, okay? We have to hold them there because we can't afford the increase that it will cost to move to step 3. I'll talk about that too a little bit later in the presentation. Again, this is not the news I wanted to provide. Certainly, as I'm approaching my retirement, I hope to leave on a happy budget, but I really regret that we're having to do this, but we just don't have an option. Minimum wage, you may remember too that we talked about this. The General Assembly passed a law that they voted to gradually increase minimum wage to $12 per hour by 2023. So they had a requirement for next year to move minimum wage up to $9.50, and I believe it was in there for January. But now what they did when they came in April is they changed that to May 1st. So you cannot have an employee paid less than $9.50 an hour after May 1st. What we did, because we had to raise the substitute rates for paraprofessionals and clerical positions in order to meet the minimum wage requirement, and we were doing it at the start of the year, so we would just carry it through. We also decided that we needed to raise the wage for teachers, nurses, and long-term teacher subs, because by raising the paraprofessional and clerical to $76, for example, they were only $4 less than what we paid a teacher to substitute in a classroom all day at $80. So we had bumped everybody up, and that came as a cost to us of over $61,000. So what this budget now proposes is that we start the required minimum wage payment on May 1st when it's required by law, so it'll only be in there for the very end of next year's budget, and that we only do it for the positions that we're required to do it for. So that means our cost for that will be $5,000, and we're then saving or taking out from the March budget over $56,000. Again, certainly not the ideal situation, but it means that PCPS will be meeting the legal requirements with minimum wage and not then going beyond that and adding an additional cost to the budget. So what does this look like in terms of all these reductions that I've talked to you about? So the first one you see is the reduction in the compensation increase. So remember that the state portion of that was about $169,000. Our portion of that was about $173,000. So by not doing any compensation increase, we can take the $173,000 we were using to help offset the other costs and the big concern about sales tax revenue. The minimum wage increase, by only doing the ones we're required to do as of May 1st, means we've saved out of the March budget over $56,000. I am including in this budget a reduction of 2 FTEs. One is a teacher position, one's a support staff position. Both of those are through attrition. That's how we'll capture those. Neither of them will lead to the elimination of an instructional program. But we need to capture more savings. When personnel is over 80% of your budget, you've got to get the majority of those budget reductions through personnel. So as you move into this recession, that's going to be the case for you in future years if you have to continue to make reductions. So our total personnel reductions comes at over $489,000. So then we look at operational or categorical reductions, looking at a 10% reduction of materials, supplies, professional development, and equipment. So it's almost $29,000. I know it's not a lot, but it helps meet the need that we have to reduce the budget. For those of you that weren't with us during the recession, oftentimes we had to do this type of reductions to these types of categories to capture the additional funding that we weren't getting through others. Textbooks being reduced by 19,000 and technology by 19,000. So there's still funding in both the textbooks and technology. A lot of our textbooks we do online work with, and that is wrapped up into this as well. So total operating reductions over 67,000. So now you see our net proposed budget actions come in at over actually almost $557,000. So this makes your budget balanced for next year. So just a reminder, and the first bullet is another good news bullet. So as you know, I attended the council meeting last week where they approved their final budget. I was able to speak at the meeting briefly, and they are level funding the school division moving into next year, and a point needs to be made that they're level funding the school division this year. If you're reading the newspaper or hearing things, localities around us on the peninsula are reducing funding for school divisions either this year or next year, and in some cases both, with most of them having to do some sort of reduction for next year. So we are very fortunate right now that the city is trying to do its best to leave us whole in terms of local funding. Clearly next year, if there's a huge downturn in the economy, it could impact the funds the city has. But I will tell you, they continue to be very supportive of the school division, so I think they will continue to do all they can to keep the school division level funding and help in the future when they can. But that is really good news for us. The budget is balanced again with the projected 10% loss in sales tax revenue. So in the months to come, you know, we need to keep an eye on sales tax revenue and what that looks like for the state and therefore for us. So the state will do a budget forecast either in very late summer, early fall, August, September. So they will come back and do that because that might impact the budget again. If they do a reforecast and maybe the economy is doing better than what it's being projected to do now, it might be they release some of that funding. The governor did with some of the school system funding, call it, you know, what he called it was he unallotted it, so it's there being used elsewhere if it needs to be, but if the economy gets better, it could be reallocated back to school divisions. So that's the optimistic side of what could happen with the budget reforecast that will occur in August or September. The less optimistic side is if the economy is worse than what the General Assembly and the governor thought it was in May, it may cause them to have to come and do additional reductions to the state budget, which could mean additional reductions to the school division budget. Again, we've built a budget where if you get some additional reductions, because we're very conservative in how we spend as we move through the year, you'll be okay, unless it's a huge reduction, and then staff will have to come back to you probably with another amended budget, you know, asking to make some actual reductions into the budget. So that's going to be really important when they do that reforecast. So here are future budget priorities, and these are some things I think that you need to consider as you move into next year. So if you are able, or if you do receive additional funding from the state, you know, the economy does better than it's being projected, so they come back and say, we're going to move more money into school division budgets. If sales tax revenue comes in at less than a 10% decrease, then you'll be able to move money in. So Ms. Woodruff, our Executive Director of Finance, is able to track what sales tax revenue is month by month, so she'll be able to update you on that. So if you were to see that or additional lottery funding comes in above what we're receiving at this point, I would highly recommend that you consider providing your teachers with a step increase to prevent the compression of the scale. So remember I said, if you're a teacher who's on step 2, right now you're going to be on step 2 next year. So where it becomes problematic is then the following year you're going to hire new teachers. So if you're the teacher who's on the first step in the school division's step plan now and you stay there, a new teacher gets hired and comes in on the same step that a current teacher is on, even though that teacher's been teaching here at that point for 2 years. That's the compression of the scale issue. After the recession, school divisions around Virginia, including all the ones on the peninsula, had the problem of having to readjust because of the compression once they came out of the recession. Again, we built some bands in to help it make it a more affordable. It's just not affordable enough right now. So I do highly recommend that you consider moving forward with the step increase. Again, that was $109,000 if you are able to get another $109,000 into the budget. Obviously, too, I would consider doing the increases for teacher and nurse substitute pay to align with the other increases. Even if you started those later in the year as well, that would be something to consider. Provide some form of compensation for all employees. I know it's always a goal for you, so certainly that would be something to consider. I put the step increase plan in here first before the all employees because of the problem of compression. If you could avoid that in future years, it would be helpful. Again, to obviously reduce or eliminate those categorical funding decreases, and if possible, get those 2 FTEs back in the budget. You're not cutting those FTEs for enrollment. You're cutting those FTEs because we've got to find money to reduce the budget, okay? So again, where is the budget, present and future? I say this, but it's never more important than now. The state's not fully reinvested in K-12 since the recession, and I think we're about to hit another recession. So it really makes it tough on public education right now in the state of Virginia, K-12 public education, because you never quite got out of where you were, and you're about to go back to where you were on a very limited budget. Again, I have to say that the state still doesn't provide any direct funding for construction or maintenance. That's not changing, and certainly if we move into a recession, I don't see that being added back into budget, despite some recognition in Richmond that that is something that needs to be considered. I do want to mention while I'm talking about that the middle school project continues to move forward. Our architects are working diligently and doing the design work. We just took a look at the 40% plans, and we'll be soon getting to look at another set of plans. The city, for those that may wonder, borrowed already the bulk of the money for the middle school project, so the money is there. The money borrowed for the middle school project is money that supports the capital improvement plan. It is not money that can be put in the operating budget. So the capital funds that are raised by the city or borrowed by the city are not something that they could then say, oh, here, school division, we'll use this to cover your $250,000 hole because of the projected reduction in sales tax revenue. They are two totally different funding sources and always need to remain separated. So you don't want to put one-time funding in your budget. We have received some funding through the CARES Act, $56,000, but that is one-time funding. So we can't use it to fill these holes because then you're just going to find that money again. We are able to carry that money forward, so the recommendation that I've made and what we'll do as a division is move that money, so if you have a particularly hard year next year, it might help you get through in terms of some of those expenses, especially you might have if you have to do some different things in buildings because of social distancing and the like if students go back in the building. So I just wanted to remind folks that the project continues and why we're able to do that despite the fact that we're now at the start of a recession. So again, as a result of this national crisis, we just got to continue to remember that the funding situation could get worse for next year and also for years to come. It could be that it's not as bad as it's being projected. It's a real question mark right now. And I know that VDOE will continue to push out information as they get it. But you won't get another solid look, I don't think, at state budget until you get into the late summer, early fall. Certainly you can monitor what's happening nationally through other sources. So that is the budget presentation for the new amended budget that I ask that you approve this evening.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve the presented budget?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Questions, comments?
On that step plan again, how is that going to affect retirement?
Well, that means if somebody, let's say, is on step 30 and counted, or step 29 and counted on moving to 30, which would raise their, final salary. Let's say they were going to retire at the end of next year. They're not going to get, if there's an increase there, they're not going to get that increase. So it would impact if they're going for their average, because for retirement, your retirement's based on your average 3 highest years. So yes, that might hurt that. So you might see teachers who stay longer if they want to try and bump that back up because there's no compensation increase. So they were, some were counting on the 2% increase. And, during the last recession, we saw some that stayed in part for that reason, in part to maintain health insurance. And we did do, at one point during the recession, we did have an incentive to encourage some retirement because it was a way of getting savings, and one that was affordable for us. It might be something that you'll need to look at again in the future. But yeah, so that's how it could impact retirement.
And just clarity for anybody watching at home. The steps and years of experience are two separate things. So you could have a teacher with 5 years experience and they can only be on like step.
Typically, you're not going to see that because they're pretty close. Where that's going to happen is if this compression happens and you're having to hold them at the step. Most of them, it pretty well correlates with their years of service. But for people that we hire outside who you might put in the middle of the scale, it doesn't fully account because perhaps their years of service were in something that wasn't quite the same as teaching, so they're not getting counted for it.
Anybody else?
I mean, I think it's safe to say on behalf of the board that, we're frustrated, just like many of our teachers are at this point. I think the general consensus is, from the teachers that I talk with, that some are working harder than they ever have with the result of this pandemic. And I think going into next year at the board, we were fairly pleased with the budget and the direction it was going. So it's certainly an unfortunate set of affairs across the country, but also here locally for our teachers, who are certainly some of the best in the state of Virginia. So sentiment and the negative thoughts are, certainly pretty common by a lot of us board members. And, I know we'll make a conscientious effort to go back and do the right thing as more funding makes itself available, hopefully, in the coming future. Teachers can just hang in there with us and, through what it's pretty safe to say is a very lean budget year for not only next year, but maybe for years to come. So.
Also important to throw in there that not only has the state reduced funding and not invested in education, like you said, but on top of that, they have put out numerous mandates that is added to our budget. So just a 1-2 punch there.
And I don't anticipate that won't continue to happen either, so.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Sadly.
absolutely not. Anybody else? Thank you very much, Dr. Parrish, and your staff for all your work. I know it wasn't easy, but as always, y'all did just a great job of being able to reel us in and get us on track. So on behalf of the board, I would like to thank everybody who helped with that.
Thanks.
Ms. Reimers, would you like to call for a vote, please?
Mr. Holcomb?
Aye.
Ms. Hessel? Aye. Mr. Jordan?
Aye.
Mr. Freeman?
Aye.
Mr. Ingram?
Aye.
Vice Chair Sheeler?
Aye.
Chairman Carr?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. Next item, consideration of approval of changes to the 2021 through 2025 capital improvement plan.
Yes, and, I mentioned the funding of the middle school project, just to make sure everybody has a full understanding of that, because it's going to sound a little crazy that I'm talking about moving almost $600,000 around in the capital budget when I've just told you about we almost cut $600,000 out of the operating budget. But again, this is money that has been borrowed, the vast majority of it already by the city to support our project. But I'm bringing forward to you the recommendation this evening that we move the funding that's in your current CIP for the primary school roof at a total of $587,300 over to the middle school project. We've spoken with you over the past few months about our work to try and work with a solar company or the solar field to get some assistance in doing the recovering of our roofs, because as you remember, originally we had on the CIP that we were going to have to fully replace them, but after having somebody out and do some real studying of the roofs, we were told that we really just need to recover it. So we are trying to work with the solar companies to do that. Unfortunately, in the manners that we were looking, would have increased the debt capacity of the city, which is not something we want to do, because that results then in the need to borrow additionally or raise taxes, neither of which we wanted to do. So we did move the high school roof over to the project back earlier this spring, late winter, knowing that that meant the high school roof might end up back on the CIP and need to be funded at some later date. And we talked to City Council about that. You might remember in a joint meeting that we had, I talked about that, or it might have been one that the CIP meeting I went to for them. You all might not have been there, but so now I'm bringing forward the proposal to move the 587 from the primary school roof over to the middle school project. By doing that, it rounds the project out. There's a few more things that we really believe need to get done on that project to make it a worthwhile project, a school that you as a community or we as a community will have for years and years and years to come. And that means that the total for the middle school project will be a little bit over $20 million. So in doing that, I did talk to our city manager and explain to him that we're still working with the solar company, and ultimately it would mean going out to bid to see if we can have a public-private partnership that would help get the roof done, which would not increase the debt capacity, might even enable us to get both done, put solar on both roofs. We also hope to put solar panels on this middle school roof, which ultimately then will be a savings for the school division. If we're not able to do that, then we may have some conversation about trying to access the current debt capacity that the city has, because in no way, shape, or form do we want to increase debt capacity at this time for those two roofs. So we are continuing the work on this, and I will continue to do it, and hopefully we can wrap up some of this with the solar company and perhaps the city council prior to my departure at the end of the month. But we needed to make a decision about this funding because the architects need to finish their design work so we can stay on schedule, and they need to know exactly what their budget amount is to do that design work. So I'm bringing forward this recommendation to approve the amended capital improvement plan as presented this evening, which is shifting the primary school roof funding over to the middle school project, knowing that we may have some other avenues to access funding for the primary and ultimately the high school roof.
Excuse me, thank you. Do I have a motion to approve? And a second? Questions there? Reimers?
Mr. Holcomb?
Aye.
Ms. Hessel?
Aye.
Mr. Jordan? Mr. Freeman?
Aye.
Mr. Ingram?
Aye.
Vice Chair Sheeler?
Aye.
Chairman Farley?
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you, and we'll kick off communications with Dr. Parrish.
Yes, we sent a message to our parents as well as all of our employees today, a slight change in the schedule for our school year. So what we've done is we are going to stop all new instruction online as of June 5th will be the last day of that. School does officially end on June 12th, so that last week of the 7th through the 12th, any students that have makeup work that they want to get turned into their teachers or something they need to catch up on, they can still do that. But if they've got all of their work completed, they will not end up necessarily interacting with teachers. There will be no online classes that they'd be required to attend. I will tell you, we know that some of our teachers may have some fun things going on through the online that students may want to participate that week. But it will mean that the last week is a little bit less stressful probably for folks, and I think that they'll appreciate having that. So we did send that out today. I just wanted to make sure that you understood that, and also if just our community who may not be school parents or watching may know that we've made that adjustment in the school calendar. We are working diligently on graduation. I know local school divisions have provided information about steps that they're going to take now that the governor has produced some concrete information about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and a clear indication that we have no idea when we'll get to phase 2 or phase 3 because it will depend on statistics. So we hope to get some more information out about graduation at the latest, probably Tuesday after Memorial Day and possibly by the end of this week. And that'll go directly to our senior families and students. I do want to thank the city. I don't know if you all drove around on Friday, but we decided one way we wanted to support our seniors was to try and get our businesses to show their support as well as our churches and other community members by putting some stuff on their signs. So the city helped us. They called the businesses and churches for us. So if you got a chance to drive around on Friday, you saw, supporting our graduating seniors or congratulations to PHS seniors, teachers. The city also created a video, so I will push that out to you all, school board members, and also we're going to probably tweet that out if we haven't done that already. So it was nice to see that our businesses and churches and other community groups were out there showing a sign of support, and certainly the help that we got from city staff was very, very much appreciated. And then finally, I just want to, once again, I know as Mr. Jordan mentioned, our teachers are working so hard in our new online learning. Our para educators are supporting our teachers online, are working on projects in the schools. Maintenance workers are working diligently, clerical staff, technology staff, it just goes on and on. The level of work that's being done right now is just tremendous, and as again, Mr. Jordan mentioned, some people are saying they're working harder than they were before because they've had to do something entirely new now. So I just want to thank them again for their hard work and for the support that communities and members and parents are showing for all of them, especially for our teachers. It really is much appreciated. Part of my message today was also the reminder that we are observing Memorial Day as a student holiday, so everybody has, I know it sounds weird to say when schools are closed, but everybody has Monday off from school and hopefully can enjoy a 3-day weekend with their families and however they would like to celebrate that, as well as our employees. So that's my report for this evening.
Thank you. Mr. Holcomb.
I'd like to say thank you to those who've written very nice comments to Dr. Parrish and the administration for what's been happening recently. But I also want to say a thank you to all of our substitute teachers out there, which I mean every parent in Poquoson right now doing the deal. Just in my walking around, looking around, I've just heard almost nothing negative about that, and I think it's been a great job for the parents who've stepped up. I think we spoke last time we were together about the parents who are working full-time essential jobs. That's just difficult, and the child care issues. And I've seen the community pull together, as you always see in this town. I just want to say thank you and encourage you guys to hang in there. I think maybe the one last week of school might have been a substitute teacher strike, but the parents weren't sure how that happened. But
we're not
good
sure
job,
who's going
guys.
to be more excited, the parents or the students or the teachers. It's
So,
a toss-up.
thank you all for what you're doing also out there in the streets in Poquoson. Keep the kids educated.
Thank you. Mr. Freeman.
I'd just like to thank the central office staff for recruiting the school board to deliver certificates and plaques to students who earned them over the last couple of months and weren't able to come get the recognition at the school board regular meetings. I know the group of students that I had, seeing their faces light up and the smiles they had when I was explaining what I was there for and handed in the certificates was really, really cool to see the students do that. I think it meant a lot to them, so thank you for organizing that.
Our pleasure.
Thank you. Mr. Ingram.
I just want to thank the parents for, having patience with the schools, the teachers, and the administration, and thank the students for continuing to work hard and finish out this year. And just want to thank all the people that sent emails, kind words, and willingness to donate their services. So, thank you.
Mr. Jordan.
I spoke quite a bit earlier, so I'll take a step back here.
We're used to it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know. I know, that's the truth. But as Dr. Parrish indicated, I've been getting the question a lot in our community. We will get some more material out in the coming days regarding graduation. It's a question that I get almost everywhere I go, and I just want the community to know that certainly the school board office is actively working on a potential solution. And as Dr. Parrish mentioned, we will get some material out in the coming days pertaining to that particular issue. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Ms. Helsel.
I just want to thank the City Council for always having our back. And Craig, to your point, it was fun going out and take. I have to thank Ms. Reimers and give her a shout out because I really think you are a jack of all trades. Watching you hammer those certificates that had some issues with them, thank you for everything that you do. Keep it straight and just being able to do everything. So thank you all.
Thank you. Ms. Sheila.
I would also like to thank our teachers. I spoke with a couple of them, and I know they've put in extra hours throughout this transition as they managed the transition to online learning. Lots of hurdles, and I really appreciate them. We got a letter from one of our parents, and as they put it, Poquoson High School has done an excellent job of continuing the teaching and learning through this fourth marking period. She said, as a parent, I have appreciated the opportunity for my son to organize and manage his time and assignments as he would in higher education, but with the appropriate leniency and grace for a high school student. So I really like that we've had parents who have been very supportive and have recognized the effort of our teachers. I also have the pleasure of thanking our board clerk, Lena Reimers, who has done a super job assisting the board throughout the months of the interview process for a new superintendent. Very challenging. Her efforts were made much more complicated by the social distancing, and Lena was continuously thoughtful and detailed, providing us the tools that we needed to help us in our decision process, making special little booklets for us so we could get it all straight. Just wonderful. Perhaps more importantly, she greeted each candidate warmly, making everybody feel welcomed and making the process run really smoothly for everybody. So I wanted to thank you, and we have a little treat for you to take home. Thank you very much. On behalf of the whole board.
Thank you, Ms. Sheila. One of the drawbacks of going last is everybody takes your comments, because I was going to thank parents for just taking the time to just let us know that we're doing a good job, or the teachers are doing a good job. All the positive communication about how we've stepped up to the bat, of course, the teachers and city council keeping us funded, and that is huge, and really appreciate that. And it was very cool going and delivering plaques, and I guess I got the joke. She gave me one that was it was a non-existent address, so I'm on a goose chase here. I can't find this one.
How long have you lived in Poquoson?
No, it wasn't there. It really wasn't there, I promise. Anyway, it was fun, and we went by, I guess, at like 3:30 or 4, and somebody said, "Hold on, let me see if she's up yet." But anyway, just strange times, and we're meeting the challenge and beating it. So thanks to everyone who's been working towards this. So, all right, do we have any material for board review?
You do not this evening.
Okay, with that, we will adjourn. Thank y'all.